So in the Leadville 100, 9,000 feet to 12,000 feet is a huge difference in work capacity. Your work capacity decreases significantly over that 3,000 feet as compared to 3,000 feet to 6,000 feet or 4,000 feet to 7,000 feet.
3, 2, 1.
Leadville, the podcast for the 100-mile mountain bike race. This is the show that breaks down, builds up, gets you ready, freaks you out for the highest and arguably the hardest one-day mountain bike race in the actually, there's no arguing here. This is the hardest mountain bike race in the country, so get ready, and this show will help you get ready for that. On this show, we take a deep breath and find there's something lacking. Air. A must-hear interview with Dr. Colin Grissom, a well-known pulmonologist with special expertise in exercise at high altitude. In our Questions for the Queen segment, Rebecca Rusch gets gross, talking about how to keep going when you have GI issues.
And we're going to talk about your first opportunity for some road race tactics, as well as what is often acknowledged as the best part of the race in our course segment. And Jonathan Lee's training advice will finally cut you a little bit of slack.
I am Michael Hutton. Some people call me Hottie, 6-time attendee, 5-time starter, 4-time finisher of the Leadville Trail 100. Now, I'm missing a part in there, right? 5-time starter, 4-time finisher. There's a 1 in there I'm missing. I'll get to that in a future show. It's a good story. You're also hearing Eldon Fatty Nelson, who is going for his 21st Leadville Trail 100 finish. But Fatty, look, I'm sorry. I know you're going for your 21st Leadville 100. Your 22nd time at the event. You got the 2,000 miles. But really, sir, you are doing what us journalists call burying the lead. You may be racing your 21st LT 100, but it's what you plan to do before that big day that is the total story. And a lot of people might say, are you out of your mind?
Yes, I am slightly out of my mind. I am doing the Breck Epic, which is 6 days of stage racing at about the same altitude as Leadville, perhaps just a smidge lower. My wife and I are racing the co-ed duo division. And so 6 days of hard racing and then quickly pack and drive over to Leadville and race the next day as well. So we've done 7 days of racing before with Leadville as a component of that. Last time we did that, Breck Epic came after Leadville, and that was a rough time. So I'm nervous, but you just can't get I can't get enough of Colorado racing, I guess.
Yeah, wait a second. You're still missing the whole story. Again, he's burying the lead, folks. Prior to any of that, you're going to be at Crusher and the Tusher with me, which you have called mile for mile as hard as the Leadville Trail 100. So you're going to be stacking that race up with the Breck Epic and the Leadville Trail 100, and that's all within the span of a month, folks. That's a lot. That's a lot of effort compacted into a short time frame. So, Fatty, how are you preparing different this year as compared to years past?
It's pretty simple, really. I'm training with higher volume at a lower intensity, with no real expectation of doing any of these especially fast. I am racing because I love being in races this year. The pressure is truly off. For Leadville, for Crusher and the Tusher, for Breck Epic, my objective is to have fun. I want to appreciate the course. All three of them are brilliant in their own ways. I want to dial my effort back enough that I can say hi and high five anyone in my general area. I'm doing the stuff I love, and I don't need to win anything. I don't have any new PRs I want to set. I just want to go out and be a part of 3 really amazing races. Mm-hmm. And we're putting in 2 long days each weekend instead of 1 long day each weekend, because Breck is going to require that kind of stamina. But I don't have to be fast on either of those 2 long days. I just got to have fun. It's a race season of having a ball for me.
So a little tune-up race in the Tushers, then a Leadville taper in Breckenridge, and then, of course, the Big Daddy The Breck Epic. You probably shouldn't tell our listeners to follow Fatty's lead, that is, in terms of a tapering race plan. But what they should do, how you should follow his lead, is when it comes to equipment. And that gets us to our first sponsor, the Leadville Podcast, brought to you by Shimano. Not only is all that back-to-back racing going to be terror on you, Fatty, it's also going to put some serious stress on your equipment.
Yeah, no question about that. And the thing is, Lisa and I are both terrible mechanics. I mean, truly awful. So we're hoping our gear bets for this 7 days of racing are going to be fine. And we, hopefully our bikes will just be great. We are still hedging our bets, so we're each bringing 3 bikes. We have identical Specialized Epic full suspension bikes, which we have at this point planned to race all 7 days, if at all possible. As backup, we each have geared hardtails, and as final secret bonus backup, we each have our trusty single speeds. So if you see either of us on single speeds any of the 7 days, things have gone seriously wrong. But the Epics, I think, are going to be fine for the whole 7 days, knock on wood. A lot of that has to do with my experience so far. Specifically, the Di2 just feels so bomb-proof. Neither of us have needed any service to our drivetrains since we got these bikes back in April. And the same thing goes for the XD cranks, the brakes, the pedals, all of this. Shimano has their stuff dialed. Now, both the Hammer and I are kind of cautious and easier on our gear than some people. I will admit that for sure. But I've been riding with other companies' MTB drivetrains for a couple of years, and I have never had this reliable of an experience as we have had this year. And so I'm super glad we're riding and racing Shimano this year.
Yeah, XT, it really should just be the group set they call Trust. Because you can trust that stuff. That's the set that says, here we are. Beat on us, pound us, race us. We'll be there for you. Go to bike.shimano.com for more. We will also have a link at Leadville100podcast.com. And now onto the course. Each show we are discussing a segment of the Leadville Out and Back. We're doing the course in order, so all you have to do is listen to each show and you'll be able to get a breakdown of the course as it happens, as you ride it. In show number 3, we went over the first climb of the day, St. Kevin's, then back onto the pavement and around Turquoise Lake. We're 14 miles in, and now a right-hander onto Hagerman Pass Road.
Yeah, I am almost unwilling to say this, Hottie, because I don't want to jinx our listeners, but watch out for this hairpin right turn off the pavement and onto the dirt. It is a tight uphill right-hander. There's a lot of people around you. You're going onto dirt, and I have seen a ridiculous number of people wash out and go down right there. I've also seen a guy take a high-speed high side on the way back, ending his day. But that's a topic for another episode, about 60 miles later episode.
Mm-hmm. There'll be a lot of folks there standing at the Hagerman Pass Road entrance cheering you on. That's great. Hagerman looks easy on paper, but there are some things to know about this road, some things to do and to look out for. Let's start with the to-know items.
Right. So the mileage is part of the to-know part of this course. You've got between 2.5 miles of washboarded, wide dirt road at a very mild climbing grade. That's Hagerman. Then a sharp hairpin left at mile 17 changes everything all at once. You go from wide, easy, mild, washboardy for sure, dirt road, to having a steep, rocky, semi-technical climbing Jeep road and double track for about 2 miles, which will bring you to mile 19. And of course, while these numbers are helpful, the what to do and what to look out for are what really matter.
Let's go back to that 3-mile washboard Hagerman Road. It's kind of like this. Here I am on Hagerman Road, riding on Hagerman Road. Now, even though it's bumpy like that, this is a terrific opportunity to eat. Yeah, you'll be jostling around a little bit, but grab a gel, something, and swallow it down because the grade's not too bad. It's also a place you can go to the bathroom, take a pee, and you'll see a lot of people doing this, pulling over to the side of Hagerman and relieving themselves. Above all else here, you want to get a group to work with. There are going to be people like 20, 30, 40 feet in front and behind you. Make the slight effort to join a group if there is one, or bring 2 or 3 of you together if there is no group. Like, talk to each other. Hey, let's get together, guys. Work together. 3 miles is long enough that a pace line does help here.
Yeah, it truly does. And the flip side of that coin is that every year I've raced the Leadville 100, I found some big, strong guy who seems perfectly content to pull a train all by himself. And here is some great advice for free. Don't be that guy. Take your pole, be part of the group, but help yourself and everyone around you by showing folks that if you take a very short pole, 3 to 5 seconds, and you've got a good-sized group, 10 to 15 seconds if there's just a couple of you, and then let the next person go by, you are going to be a faster group. Don't sacrifice yourself. Don't make a hero pole. There's no reason to be a hero. There's plenty of you. Work together. In any, and this is true not just on Hagerman, but on any pace line during this race. So going back to the eating thing, I know I keep emphasizing this, but it truly is critical. As you get close to mile 17, where you're going to make that sharp left turn onto Sugarloaf, where things suddenly get technical and rocky, eat something, because you are at the last moment that you're going to be able to eat for a few miles, and not just a few miles, but for a considerable amount of time, which is even more important.
So you make that sharp left onto Sugarloaf. It'll be obvious on race day. But if you go out and ride the Hagerman and Sugarloaf before, and you probably should if you have time, you could miss this left. In fact, I know somebody who has missed the left turn onto Sugarloaf. A good buddy of mine who's stronger than me, got out ahead of me, had not been to Leadville before. We were out reconning this section of the course, and he takes off on Hagerman and gaps me and gets me out of sight and misses the left to Sugarloaf. And it's a tight, almost 180 turn. He missed the left, kept going straight. I don't know where he ended, but got pretty close to. I think he got out to the Colorado Trail, which is out there quite a ways. We ended up going up and over Sugarloaf and down the power line and out to the pavement. Of course, we're trying to text him, phone him. There's no service back there. So if you do Sugarloaf in training, it's a hard left. And what did we say, Fatty? About 3 miles up? About 3 miles. So just watch your odometer. Make that hard left onto Sugarloaf.
Yep, steep, sharp, almost 180 degrees, like you say, turn, and it is going steeply up all of a sudden. And like you mentioned, on race day, that is not a concern you need to have. Not only is it marked, there will be a course marshal who is waving you over so that people funnel in and don't pinch each other off on that turn. So I don't know about you, but Sugarloaf is my favorite part of this entire race. The day is warming up. The sun is coming up. My legs still feel great. I feel friendly. The caffeine from the coffee is hit. And it feels a little bit more like mountain biking and a little bit less like a time trial.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, me too. I'm not a huge fan of Hagerman except for the views. I'm actually happy to get off it and make that left onto Sugarman because I really like it. It tightens up a little bit. There's more trees. And a lot of folks say the same thing. I understand Rebecca Rusch says the same thing about Sugarloaf.
Yeah.
It's just a great spot.
Yeah, so does the Hammer, my wife. Anyone who really takes a look and thinks about it, they're like, you know what? This is a spectacular day on a spectacular course. So take a moment and enjoy it. Pro race tip there. This is definitely unlike, though, any other climb in the race, right?
The character of Sugarloaf really doesn't match up with what the other things you're going to see.
No.
The line is narrower, and you have to make line choices as you go up. You're either going to be on the left side of this trail or the right side of this trail, and there's lots of rocks and even some branches sticking out on the trail that will require you to move your bike around a little bit more. In addition, you're still going to be running into traffic here.
Sure.
So, yeah, you can pass, but it is tricky. You got to be patient as you try and move up the field.
Yeah, don't burn matches if you don't need to. I think that is the touchstone phrase of the day. After you've gone for a little while, not for a terribly long in distance, and I'm thinking it feels like about a mile, but it may be even less. Distances feel longer when you are doing hard climbs. Sugarloaf is going to ease off, and it rolls on in double track and Jeep road for a bit. Almost always some puddles that you can either choose to go through. I would recommend against that because you don't need that gritty sand in your drivetrain for the next 80 miles of the day. And then at 19 miles, Sugarloaf is going to turn down precipitously, which means that you are no longer on Sugarloaf, but you are on the power line.
Mm-hmm. And the power line descent will be the topic of our next installment of the course.
Hey, Hadi, I know we're not talking about the power line descent till next episode, but I want to preview a couple of interesting facts about this descent. First off, it is 4 miles long, and that is a good number to remember for the return trip. Second, in my 20 finishes of this race, I bet I have passed more than 200 people on this descent part of the race. All of those people are faster than I am when their wheels are actually rolling.
Power line is pinch flat hell, to be sure. Now, do you worry, Fatty, about flatting on the power line?
Well, when I was a younger man, if you listen back to the season 0, episode 1 of this podcast, and I talk about my first race, I used to inflate my tires to 50 PSI. I was so worried about flatting on the power line. I mean, an unimaginable number nowadays, but I don't worry about it at all anymore. Neither the Hammer nor I have pinch flatted even once since we've been riding with the Envy M525 wheels. It's these wide hookless bead that really do the tricks here. Envy has had this really wide leading edge for the hookless bead, and this broad surface creates a more forgiving platform on which the tire can bottom out. And it proves really effective in reducing the likelihood of those snake bites or pinch flats.
And with that lower risk, you can ride lower pressures, which gives you better traction and improved rolling resistance.
Yeah. So I'm 167 pounds right now, right? I'm running 19 pounds in front and 19 PSI in front and 20 in the back, lower than I ever have before. Still nothing, no pinch flats at all. The Hammer, my wife, is running 18 PSI, 19 in the back.
Mm-hmm. That is some cush. Learn more about the complete M-Series lineup at envy.com. That's ENVE.com.
It is your women's champion, Rebecca Rusch from Ketchum, Idaho. Welcome back, Rebecca.
Okay, Fatty, the 4-time champ Rebecca Rusch is standing by. Time for questions for the Queen.
Let's talk a little bit about what do you do if you are having a GI issue. And, just we're not going to dance around the words. If you throw up and basically lose all your, lose whatever you've been drinking and eating, if you have painful gas where it really hurts, or, and of course, sometimes you have to poop. And when you have GI issues, how have you handled that, or what do you recommend?
Yeah, and this is really common. And again, it goes back to the fact that you've asked, by pushing so hard in your legs, you've asked all the blood flow to move out of your digestive system into your muscles and your extremities. And so how could it digest anything? Right. And so when you plan your food intake, and this is why I really go for a lot of liquid calories, is that it's easier to digest. So think about things. I sort of like the terminology. I try to eat like an infant or a very elderly person, and you think about, when I was 24-hour racing a lot before I found GU Nutrition, I used to drink a lot of Ensure each lap because it was liquid. You didn't have to chew it, and it digests very quickly in liquid form. And so think about that, because if your gut can't absorb it, that's where you end up getting the GI issues, and that's where they come from. Yeah. Your body has stopped digesting, and it said, no way, you're asking too much of me. I can't do it. I can't do both things at once. And so, again, the strategy, when it does happen, you've got to slow down, because you've got to allow You've got to allow blood to get back into your stomach so you can digest what you put in there. And you don't have to necessarily stop. If you catch it early enough, you start kind of feeling that's your body. Your body will always give you a signal before you get to the point of projectile vomiting. It's always going to give you a little tap on the shoulder first. And so really listen to those things, or a little gurgly stomach, or so you do have to slow down. And I really try to think about drinking plain water. If you've got this sort of big bolus of food, you've been packing all your nutrition in, you're doing what Rebecca says, and it's just not absorbing, that's where it's going to sit in your stomach and it's going to make you vomit. And so plain water, small sips of that, if you start to feel the signal at the top on the shoulder, drinking slowly, a little bit of water will often dilute it enough, give enough moisture in there that it can be absorbed. You've got to give it time and then get back on your nutrition program. And you're allowing the blood flow to get back from your muscles into your stomach. A second thing to do is to cool off. And you can take, your jersey and drop it in a stream and put it back on. And again, that's about getting blood flow from the outside to the inside. And so by cooling off, it's going to shunt blood back into your gut. And the third thing, and this is another reason why I really love the GU electrolyte tablets, is, it's sort of an ancient sort of strategy, is ginger is very settling for the stomach. And the GU electrolyte tablets do have ginger in them for exactly that reason, to settle, gastric distress. And it's really common in ultra endurance events. And that's why they put that in there. There's also little ginger chews. You can throw a couple of those in your pack if you're kind of prone to it. But the bottom line, you've got to slow down, see if you can recover from it. If you're past the point of no return, we'll talk about, the three things: vomit, poop, and gas. So vomit, really you try to hold on to it if you can, because it's kind of gross, but there's still really good undigestible nutrition and food that you put a lot of hard work into getting into your stomach. And if you can keep it in there, it's still really good calories that you need. And so, slowing down, trying to swallow, sip water to try to keep it in there is great if you can. And eventually it will hopefully digest and provide energy for your legs. If you're past that point and you just need to get it out, just let it go. But then know that you are starting from zero. You are starting from nothing. And so slowly but surely, you need to right away. It's like as soon as you throw up, wipe your mouth off, open a GU packet, because you got to start over again. And it's not your energy level is not going to get better on its own. And so but tiny sips as you're coming back from something like that, little tiny bits of energy, but continually. So that's the vomit. The poop is a different strategy, because unlike the needing to throw up, where you still have good calories in your gut that are useful, by the time it gets down to the other end, it's not very useful to you anymore. So if you got to go, let it go. You're going to be lighter. You're going to be faster. You're going to feel better. But also keep in mind is the reason you're having diarrhea, a lot of the reason and what's coming out of there is undigested food. So you also didn't absorb those calories and then that nutrition that you so desperately need. So the strategy of coming back from that is the same. Very slow, continual sips of liquid calories and plain water.
That's right.
And I've experienced both of those things, and you can get through it. That's the good news. You can totally get through this. This is not a game changer. It's not a race ender at all.
It's something to be coped with and adapted to.
Yeah. Adapt, move on, and then really come back from it. It's like the phoenix rising from the ashes, and imagine the amazing story you'll have. It's like, I pooped 17 times and I still finished the Leadville Trail 100. I mean, it'll be a really great story. It's a better story than, I had diarrhea and I had to quit the race. That's not as cool of a story. The last one is kind of funny. I've experienced this a little bit, having gas, you're putting a lot of, different kinds of manufactured foods into your stomach. And this is a really important reason to train with the food that you're going to race with. It seems like people get this when they kind of load up on weird stuff that they're not used to. and it's just not sitting right. Just like the poop with the gas, you got to let it go.
As someone who's done a lot of single speeding, I found that changing your position can help when you've got a kink in your system.
Totally.
And that's why it's painful. That is, stand up, sit down, ride a little side to side. In other words, find where the kink in that hose is.
Yeah.
And do what it takes to get it unbent. And of course, you're going to feel a lot better. So it's change your position, stand up for a second, and you don't have to, in most cases, get off the bike.
I think the important thing with all of that's a really good tip, is to realize that this stuff doesn't resolve itself, and it's up to you to be the driver. It's up to you to change your position, change your nutrition, get off, walk around, do whatever you're going to do. You have control, basically. Your stomach is not controlling you, or the cramps in your legs. You actually can do something about it. It's maybe not what you want to do, which is often slow down or get off the bike. But if that's going to save your race, then by all means, that's your best strategy at that point.
Reba? I will say this was not a sexy topic, but it was one that needed to be addressed, and I appreciate your wisdom on it.
Yeah, way to put it all out there. Thanks, Fatty.
Hottie, I personally have thrown up on the Leadville course, and I've actually had to scramble out of view on the climb up Columbine to poop off to the side of the course. And I have definitely cramped on the course. Now, when the cramping one, oddly enough, Reba actually passed me along with my wife she was riding with, and gave me some electrolyte capsules, which was kind of a cool fanboy moment, getting electrolyte tabs from the Queen of Pain to save you from a cramp. But throwing up on the course, it feels better instantly. But like Reba said, that happened to me right as I was getting ready to go up the power line. I truly was starting from nothing, and I did not do what Reba was saying, which is, take slow sips and work your way back gradually. I tried to act like, I feel better, and now I can go full force again. And a mile and a half later, once again, I had to throw up. It was only then that I went to water, mostly just because that was all I thought I could tolerate, and a little bit of food. And I finished the race, but it was definitely not my fastest one. But that guidance of back it off if you're feeling sick and try not to end your race, but instead slow down and finish the day.
So Tom Dumoulin is not the only one.
No.
He did it very publicly in the Giro d'Italia a year ago.
Yeah.
That poor guy. And I think he diagnosed that in the end, too. I know he did. He went to see doctors and experts to figure out what caused him to pull over and just explode, essentially, in the middle of the race. And it can happen to anyone. It's one of those, almost those fear things you have going into races. Geez, is my gut going to be okay? Am I going to be okay? Because anything can go wrong. And you're at altitude, which can make you queasy. So, yeah. Good advice there from Reba, as always. If you've got questions for the Queen, leave us a comment at Leadville100podcast.com. Tweet with the hashtag Leadville100podcast, or just call or text us 719-453-1514.
Yep. And one quick plug for Rebecca. She is the winner of the very recent 350-mile Dirty Kanza XL. So obviously has got both the brawn and brains to go the distance, and along with Yuri Hauswald, who took second overall in that Dirty Kanza XL, she is sharing that wisdom at her new Rusch Academy camps. There's a gravel version, there's a mountain bike version, and you will ride with and learn directly from Reba Rusch. You think 3 minutes or 5 minutes with her here is great. Imagine a whole day of learning from the Queen of Pain. It's pretty amazing. Learn more at RebeccaRusch.com.
Fatty, I got my first care package from the feed, and they have started me off on that much talked about mix called Martin's.
Yeah, I think we both used a variation of that mix on our big rides last weekend. I think you rode with the 160 calorie version, while I went with the 320 calorie version. What did you think?
Easy drinking.
Yeah.
We were just talking about GI issues. This stuff would be, if you think you have a sensitive stomach, or something, Martin's would be a perfect mix. So I found it went down really easy. Usually that kind of calorie count, like 160, 320, means a sugary flavor that quickly becomes unsettling, but not this stuff. The other thing I loved is the package precision. I'm talking about the stuff of the package the powder came in. They tell you exactly how much water to use. No guessing with scoops and different size bottles.
Yeah. What I actually did to make sure I did the mix just how they said to do it, because I understand they really thought it through. That each serving comes in a little envelope of its own. So I put my bottle on my coffee scale, and I poured 500 grams of water in there and mixed it just how they said. And my overarching impression of this is that it is a ridiculously non-intrusive way to get down a lot of calories. It's one bottle, 320 calories for me, 160 for you. And it's a little sweet, a little. And it's a little thick because there's pectin in this. And it makes that's how they form the hydrogel, so that you stay hydrated instead of just sweat it right back out. But there's no aftertaste at all that I could notice. And I felt great. My stomach was fine for this 5+ hour ride in the heat. And I didn't feel that weird energy spike you get with some energy drinks where it hits you fast and then leaves you hanging. It's smooth tasting and it burns smooth. I am a fan.
And our podcast listeners can get a great price on a training and or racing pack, custom curated for Leadville racers. Go to thefeed.com/Leadville for the race pack. And there's a link on that page to go to the training pack. And be sure to use the code Leadville15 for a 15% discount on either of those boxes. Again, thefeed.com/Leadville, and use the Leadville15 code at checkout.
Yep, little pro tip, you can use that code as many times as you want. If you like Martin's, use it often, get all you need.
Fatty, I've done a lot of bragging on this show. I've bragged about how I don't get cramps, I don't get GI issues, I can eat what I want. But when it comes to our feature topic for this show, I'm like most people who go to Leadville. That elevation whacks me over the head.
Yeah, it may seem a little weird to say this, but that's the whole point of the race. I mean, conduct a little thought experiment here. Suppose you magically lifted this exact same course and set it down near your home in California. Would the Leadville race have become an iconic endurance race?
Well, in fact, we have a ride here called the Santa Monica 100 that has just as much climbing, has the spots where you are motoring on the tarmac and blasting double track, just like Leadville. But the Santa Monica 100 has one thing the LT 100 does not: a plentiful supply of oxygen.
Yeah, the lack of oxygen is definitely challenging, and the city would still be one of a kind, right? But altitude is truly the secret sauce for the Leadville 100. I remember last year, your friend Sean and I were talking before and after the race. He and I were similarly fit, though I'd have tipped him as being stronger. But when we got to about 11,500 feet, he self-destructed while I was still okay. Maybe it has something to do with where he grew up while I grew up at 9,000 feet. In this race, altitude truly is everything. And there is a lot of myth and misinformation about preparing for, adapting to, and coping with this race in this thin air. So I found a doctor. He's a really well-known pulmonologist, actually, who is actually a mountain biker and a high-altitude climber, including mountain climbing in the Himalayas. And he's done research on altitude on Mount McKinley. So we're super fortunate to have Dr. Colin Grissom, currently the co-medical director of the Shock and Trauma ICU at the Intermountain Medical Center in Salt Lake City, talk with us. Dr. Grissom, welcome. It's great to have you here.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks.
The altitude of Leadville, the race itself, is between 9,500 and 12,600 feet. How is the altitude going to affect, say, a sea level racer?
So I think first we should just review ascent to altitude and the different forms of altitude illness that might occur in somebody who's not acclimatized.
Okay.
And ascent from elevation sea level, or we could just say less than 3,000 feet in elevation, is essentially, you can put that in a category of sea level or near sea level persons. When they travel acutely and ascend to altitudes greater than 7,000 to 8,000 feet, they incur risk of developing altitude illness. There are three primary forms of altitude illness that Leadville 100 racers should be concerned about. First, most common is acute mountain sickness. Acute mountain sickness is a syndrome that can occur within hours of arrival at altitude. Most commonly after the next morning is when symptoms might really show themselves. And the classic is headache.
Oh, yeah.
And then headache associated with lethargy or malaise, just not feeling like you have energy, or nausea, even vomiting, and lightheadedness or dizziness and disturbed sleep. So some combination of those symptoms after acute ascent to altitude, especially sleeping altitude is the key.
Yeah.
And especially once that 8,000-foot threshold, going from near sea level to sleeping altitudes of greater than 8,000 feet, there's a significant risk of acute mountain sickness. In a study done in Colorado, that kind of ascent profile, let's just say it was to Leadville, you're talking about 25% of destination tourists in the winter who experience some form of acute mountain sickness. Some is mild, and some is incapacitating. People who come there in the winter to go skiing, and they arrive at Breckenridge, they may not be able to ski for a day or two.
Right.
The good thing is that acute mountain sickness is self-limited. It lasts for a few days. You take some analgesics for the headache, maybe some anti-nausea medication, and after acclimatization occurs, you're good to go. And what's acclimatization? The most important mechanism in acclimatization is increased breathing, increased respirations. The rate and depth of respirations, meaning you breathe more times per minute and you may take deeper breaths. But what that does is it increases the amount of oxygen in the lung sacs in the lung called alveoli, and that is more oxygen to diffuse into the blood. So the more you hyperventilate, so to speak, your brain stem takes over, and persons who ascend to altitude have an increase in their breathing, and that is the primary mechanism for acute and chronic acclimatization. For full ventilatory acclimatization, it probably takes more than a week, but you get most of what you need in 5 days. 3 days is pretty good too. So I'd say, within 3 days of a stay at a new altitude, and I'm talking sleeping altitude, because you could stay, it helps to exercise up high and then sleep a little lower. That gives you the benefit of acclimatization, but lowers your risk of altitude illness, because risk of altitude illness is related to sleeping altitude. So this kind of climb high, sleep low, that's where that concept comes from.
Right.
So acclimatization, central respiratory drive, meaning what your brainstem, how much your brainstem tells you to breathe is the key. And the other key is there's genetic variation in that. So some people have a more vigorous response. They breathe more when they go to altitude, and some people have less of a response. Even though we understand the mechanism of acclimatization and that it's related primarily to breathing, and also I'll mention diuresis, meaning you lose some plasma volume and you pee out fluid from your body. That also enhances acclimatization. So the features of acute mountain sickness are fluid retention, relative less breathing, meaning your breathing response to altitude may not be as good. But all these things we understand about what causes acute mountain sickness. The best predictor for acute mountain sickness is a prior history of acute mountain sickness on similar ascents with similar rates. So acute mountain sickness is a very common category. At these altitudes, traveling from sea level to 10,000 feet in Leadville, the other form of altitude illness that's more serious is high-altitude pulmonary edema. And that is when there is a response where the lungs fill up with fluid, a maladaptive response. Pulmonary means lungs, edema means fluid. Why does that happen? The response of the blood vessels in the lungs after ascent to altitude, the response to the lower oxygen is they constrict. And when all of the blood vessels in your lungs constrict and you're exercising and have an increased blood flow through the lungs, you can actually incur patchy areas of mechanical damage to the very small blood vessels in the lungs, and they can leak fluid and blood cells into the lung, and that obviously becomes a very serious situation where you get even lower oxygen levels and have a very hard time breathing. And if you don't seek medical assistance in the form of supplemental oxygen or go down, that can result in death. The last form of altitude illness that is equally as severe, maybe more severe, is brain swelling, high-altitude cerebral edema, cerebral meaning brain, edema meaning fluid, and that is less common at the elevations of Leadville and other high-altitude areas in Colorado, but it can occur. And that is very serious and very dangerous. It's an altered level of consciousness and inability to walk without staggering or inability to stand, and that's called ataxia, walking as if you were drunk. So confusion, ataxia, medical emergency. And that is people who travel acutely from sea level to 10,000 feet are at risk for that, although I would say it's less common. Most common acute mountain sickness than high-altitude pulmonary edema. How do you mitigate against those? Best thing is gradual ascent. Now, when you're traveling for an event such as the Leadville 100, you could have a staged ascent, meaning fly to Denver, spend a night in Denver before you go up in altitude, and then pick some elevation that's 7,000 or 8,000 feet sleeping altitude and sleep there before you travel to Leadville.
Yeah,
at
stay
10,000.
in Vail, for example.
Yeah, stay in Vail, stay in Denver one night, stay in Vail one night, and then go to Leadville. And I would go to Leadville several days before the race in order to achieve some degree of acclimatization.
How many?
There's probably altitude exercise specialists who might disagree with me, but for an event that's an endurance event, I would go several days before the race.
Like a week, 2 weeks? How many?
A week would be great if you can spare that. 2 weeks would be even better because you're going to be very well acclimatized if you go there 2 weeks before. Minimum at least 3 days before. Now, the reason I say that is because I think the biggest issue with performance in the Leadville 100 would be having some acclimatization and avoiding altitude illness. The caveat is that when you go up quickly and as you acclimatize, you lose maximum oxygen consumption, maximum work capacity, VO2 max decreases about 1% for every 100 meter elevation gain above 1,500 meters, meaning for as you go above 5,000 feet, for every extra 1,000 feet you gain, VO2 max is going to decrease by about 2, maybe 3% per 1,000 feet gained. So you will not be able to exercise to the same work capacity, high intensity exercise as at sea level. So if you go there well ahead of time, and allow 2 weeks, you're going to be very well acclimatized, but any training you do in Leadville your interval training won't be to the same work intensity, work capacity, maximum work capacity that you're at sea level. In an endurance event, is that a detriment? Probably not.
So try to get there at least 3 days before the event itself, and after that, any more is gravy.
Yeah, yeah, it's better. When I say 3 days is really minimum, and I think people need this individual variation. It really helps if people have been to some high-altitude ski resort before or some high-altitude area where they've mountain biked or skied in the winter, and those people who just felt terrible for the first 2 or 3 days, and then were just able to start really feeling good on the third or fourth day, you know, maybe they went a little bit longer. Whereas there are some people who seem to be able to travel to places like Breckenridge for their ski vacation or their mountain biking vacation or hiking, and they don't have any symptoms of acute mountain sickness. And so I think looking at your personal history and experience at altitude, how does the individual person do? Mm-hmm. Have they ever had acute mountain sickness? Have they ever had high altitude pulmonary edema? And what did they feel like? What did they think their work capacity was, their exercise capacity when they traveled from sea level to high altitude? And gauge that. And some people may need longer to acclimatize, but certainly, you know, more than a week is really going to help.
Yeah. So best case, this should not be your first trip out to high altitude.
I wouldn't think so, because you're putting yourself in a situation where if you are susceptible to acute mountain sickness, you're going to get sick, not feel well, not be able to train as well, maybe even have to rest for the first couple days. And then, you know, the worst case is somebody develops high altitude pulmonary edema from that ascent. So I think it's better, almost essential, that people who race in the Leadville 100 have had some experience traveling from where they live near sea level to high altitude and exercising at high altitude, whether it's hiking, skiing, mountain biking. The other thing I'll say is people who live at altitude, meaning like Salt Lake City, 4,500 to 5,000 feet, or even Park City, 7,000 feet, they are more chronically well acclimatized, but they are not immune from developing altitude illness when they arrive at 10,000 feet.
Let's talk a little bit about the couple of days before you race and then during the race itself. And this is a pretty special race because of the altitude. So say, you know, for myself or someone who lives at lower altitude, I got to Leadville, say I have a week. What should I do during that week to best acclimate to the altitude? Is there anything?
The exercise physiology and recommendations on exercise are a little bit outside of my area of expertise. But what I can say relative to altitude illness is that if you arrive in Leadville and you get acute mountain sickness, best to rest. And there are medications available to treat acute mountain sickness, and there are also medications available that can help prevent acute mountain sickness in persons who are susceptible. The most notable is a drug called acetazolamide, and at a relatively lower dose that can not cause as much diuresis. It's a diuretic and it stimulates respiration. Taking it, if somebody has a known history of acute mountain sickness, you could take acetazolamide starting the day before ascent and for the first few days at altitude. Prevent acute mountain sickness. Once you get to altitude, if you do incur symptoms of acute mountain sickness, then not engaging in activities above Leadville, I mean, going a lot higher would not be advised. You want to let your body recover from the acute mountain sickness. So that's one issue. And then I'd say whatever your pre-race training regimen is, once you get there, probably best to take it a little bit easy the first day or two at altitude. But then I think you could get right back into it and do whatever it is you usually do before preparation for a long endurance race. Does that make sense?
Yeah, most racers are probably going to be be well into their pre-race taper at that point. So almost everyone should be resting anyway, but extra rest makes sense. And a great point you're making is you get to Leadville, which is at 10,000 feet. The next day, it may not be a good idea to make an excursion to the top of the Columbine Mine, which is at the highest point, 12,600 feet. But I want to return to Columbine during the race itself. So that is, you go from basically the lowest point practically on the course to the highest point in one sustained climb, about 3,000 feet of climbing in one pitch. Is there anything that you should be watching out for? And is there anything that a I guess someone who is not conditioned for altitude can do to do their very best during this race?
Yeah, so you need to pay attention to your body, and you don't want to blow yourself out, so to speak, early in the race. And at altitude, it's a lot easier to do that because your body's operating with less oxygen.
Right.
And so whereas at a lower elevation, there may be a certain work intensity you can maintain for a long period on a climb like that. If you don't have experience in an endurance race at that altitude, you could end up exhausting yourself early in the race on a long climb like that.
Yeah.
And you might want to hold back a little bit because you need to have reserves to finish the race. And it is much easier to overdo it early in a competition at altitude.
Yeah.
And feel really sick because you've got less oxygen. You're going to have lactate buildup sooner. You're going to reach that point of above what your steady state, your ability to sustain steady state exercises. You're going to reach that at a lower work capacity at altitude because there's less oxygen. Being very fit at sea level translates to being fit at altitude, but you have less oxygen and your sustained steady state work capacity, just like your VO2 max, will drop. It's not as predictable, but it's also going to drop some as well.
So essentially your ceiling is lower.
Yes.
Is your heart rate going to be higher or lower at altitude?
Resting heart rate is higher at altitude.
How about exercise heart rate?
Maximum heart rate's lower.
Okay.
So your resting heart rate's higher. Your cardiac output is about the same, though, even though your resting heart rate's higher, because with acclimatization, you lose plasma volume. That's part of acclimatization. So actually, your resting cardiac output is about the same, but resting heart rate's higher. Maximum heart rate is not as high at altitude because your ability to do your maximum work capacity is lower because your muscle cells run out of ability to utilize oxygen, or they run out of oxygen sooner because there's just less oxygen. There's less oxygen in the air that you're breathing in. There's less oxygen in your lungs, and there's less oxygen in your blood. There's less oxygen in tissues. So you can't work to the same intensity. So your maximum heart rate won't be the same at altitude. I think submaximal ability to do steady state exercise, meaning the concept of lactate threshold, that is not, I don't think it's predictable at altitude how that's going to change relative to your VO2 max. Some people have a very high lactate threshold, and that translates to a high lactate threshold at altitude and do so. Even though their VO2 max is decreasing, they can do steady state exercise for long periods at a pretty high work capacity, even though their VO2 max has dropped. That's less predictable, and I think it would take experience at altitude to know where the individual person's lactate threshold or steady state level is. The other thing is it can change. You're starting at 9,000 feet in this race, is that right?
At 10,000.
10,000. Mm-hmm. And what's the lowest you go?
95.
And the highest is?
12.6.
And there's a climb from 9,500 to 12.6?
Yes.
Your work capacity will change during that climb.
That's right.
You'll at 9,500 feet, you may be going a certain work capacity watts, feeling good. But by the time you're at 12,000 feet, that could be above what you're able to sustain in steady state. Mm-hmm. And you got to pay attention to that, or because if you exceed your kind of lactate threshold, your steady state ability to do steady state exercise too much, then you're going to exhaust yourself and not have anything left at the end.
Yeah. And as you are making the change from 9,000 to 12,000 feet, what is the effect of the, say, every 1,000 feet that you go up? What are the changes?
So the elevations of the Leadville 100 are high enough that the way that oxygen is carried in the blood and bound to hemoglobin, you're on what's called the steep portion of the oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve. So for a layman, what that means is going from 9,000 feet to 12,000 feet physiologically is not the same as going from, for example, 3,000 feet to 6,000 feet.
Right.
Because the way that your hemoglobin binds oxygen, when you're at 9 to 12,000 feet, every 1,000 feet that you go up, you are going to feel it a lot more than at lower altitude. Your exercise capacity is going to drop more, and the amount of oxygen content, the total oxygen in your blood, drops a lot more for every 1,000 feet that you gain. So in the Leadville 100, 9,000 feet to 12,000 feet is a huge difference in work capacity. Your work capacity decreases significantly over that 3,000 feet as compared to 3,000 feet to 6,000 feet or 4,000 feet to 7,000 feet. Above 8,000 feet, it starts to become very noticeable, especially above 10,000 feet, just because of those binding characteristics of oxygen and delivery of oxygen to your exercising muscle.
So what I'm hearing is that this isn't just a slope of that you're becoming less effective. It's actually a steepening curve.
Yes.
So when you feel bad in that final 3 miles before the turnaround, it's not just you. It's the altitude.
Yeah.
Give yourself permission to slow down. In fact, make yourself slow down so that you can get to the top without, having your tunnel vision start. Yeah. Turn around and then get yourself down. One last question. When you are at the turnaround point, the highest point in the race, 12,600 feet, good idea or bad idea to take a breather, to rest?
I think it depends upon what the course is like. At least I'm not a mountain bike racer, but I do a lot of mountain biking. Sometimes you can keep moving on the downhill portions, but give yourself a rest as you're still moving forward.
So turn around and rest on the downhill.
Yes.
That's kind of what I'm hearing.
Yes. What strategy do you use?
Once I started getting faster, I stopped stopping at the turnaround aid station with the assumption that at 12,600 feet, I was not going to catch my breath.
Yeah.
That I would do better at trying to catch my breath as I got down to altitudes that made more sense.
As long as you can hydrate and take in some nutrition on the go, I would just keep coasting down.
Dr. Grissom, thank you so much for some really practical prescriptive advice on this.
All right. You're welcome.
Oh, where was Dr. Grissom 7 years ago when I first signed up for that race? I needed all of that stuff. Lots of practical advice there, Fatty. Yeah. Did you realize that there was that compounding effect of altitude after 9,000 feet? I never heard of that.
I did not know that. I mean, I think my legs realized it at some fundamental level, and now it all makes sense. But I had always just sort of thought before that I just suck when I get to the 12,000-foot line. Or truly, a real light bulb went off when Dr. Grissom was saying, hey, as you going up Columbine, your work capacity will change. It actually helps to know that it's not that you're bonking, it's not that you have done something wrong, it's science.
And he also had some good points if you monitor your heart rate and your power.
Yeah. I know that heart rate is something that you keep on your GPS. I track my heart rate during the race, but I don't look at it. I actually have that field so it does not show on my GPS. But if you use any metric that works at your normal altitude, heart rate or watts, you're going to wind up too close to your max level of effort, your ceiling, too soon and too often. So don't hold yourself to the numbers you would normally hold yourself. You will blow yourself up before you get to mile 60.
And we're going to start to sound like a broken record here, but you really don't want to go discovering how you're going to react at altitude at the race. If you've got the means, if you've got the time, take a little vacay before the race. Maybe take a trip out to Leadville or Breckenridge or wherever and see how you do at higher altitudes.
Yeah, see how you feel. Give yourself a few days to see how you feel, how soon or how long it takes for you to feel normal, for you to be able to start riding again. And one last recommendation, and this is maybe a peculiar one, but maybe consider listening to this interview a second or third time. It is so full of good info, maybe more than you picked up the first time you listen. My wife, the nurse and hardcore endurance cyclist, says it is the single most useful advice she has ever heard about the Leadville 100. She's listened to it like 3 times. And I've picked up new things each time I have listened to it. So once again, our thanks to Dr. Colin Grissom.
At Leadville, or at any race, you will see riders with all sorts of crazy ways to carry their bike repair essentials. People tape or Velcro stuff to top tubes, stems, seat posts, seat tubes. We say do yourself a favor here. Use our sponsor, Banjo Brothers, to get your flat fixing goodies strapped properly to your bike.
Yeah, and not just your race bike either, but your commuting bike and your backpacking bike and all of your bikes. They've got great backpacks and messenger bags for when you've got to carry bigger stuff too, if you're a commuter, for example. The Banjo Brothers bags, they are on every bike that I have. It was kind of funny seeing someone posted a picture from, I think, 2013 of me and Lisa riding at Rebecca's Private Idaho. And there they were, the Banjo Brothers bags. They're on all our bikes because they always work. They're bomb-proof, reliable, great little bags. And they just work.
Banjo Brothers, tough, practical, and affordable. They're Minneapolis-based, in business since 2003. Now, to get 15% off your order, go to banjobrothers.com/fatty-favorites. And I just ordered a frame pack doing just that, expecting that any day now.
Now it's time for training tips with Trainer Road's Coach Jonathan Lee. Jonathan is a guy I trust. He is a fast guy. He's a smart guy. He's doing Leadville, and he is one of the hosts for Trainer Road's Ask a Cycling Coach podcast. Super popular podcast. I listen to it each week. He's also one of the hosts on the MTB podcast. We are at T-minus 9+ weeks.
Yeah, it's time to start turning down the intensity a bit. So, and I only say, and this isn't long term, but usually your work starts to, it increases. And I usually like to see folks and us at Trainer Road, the way that we structure the majority of our work is 3 weeks of progressively, more training load, and then a 4th week of less training load. And that less training load allows your body to just kind of recover quickly. It puts less strain so you can absorb some of the training that you've had and then step up again. So the interesting thing, though, is that it doesn't mean that you're just going to pedal around a bunch at a low intensity. Actually, still keep the intensity, decent. Doesn't have to be too crazy, but you'll definitely want to back down in terms of how much work you're doing.
Right.
So you can turn down the volume a bit this week in terms of the overall volume.
So like how much?
Yeah, I mean, if let's just say in terms of like proportions. So let's say that you're doing something like a mid-volume plan. So you're doing somewhere around 4 to 5 hours of structure a week. So that's quite a lot of structure, and that can be pretty strenuous for somebody. So in this case, you'll probably be stepping it down to 2.5 to 3. And in that 2.5 to 3 hours that you'll be doing, it'll be structured, but it'll be lower intensity. You won't be up around the threshold or anything else like that. You can keep it lower and, get away with that. So that'll let your body kind of get on top of the 8 ball, so to speak, again.
That is short and sweet, and I like it. Not every training block needs to be mind-blowingly complex. Jonathan, we'll talk with you again next week.
Sounds good. Chat soon, Eldon.
Check out trainerroad.com for in-depth training plans and info, and you'll find their cool podcast there, too.
Yeah, I am just so glad to be dialing back on the intensity a little bit, Hottie. I am so cooked.
Yeah, get your rest. Recover now, okay? As we put the wraps on this one, Fatty, we'd like to remind everyone that this podcast can be found on Apple Podcasts, Google Music, and the home website, Leadville100podcast.com. Subscribing, rating, and reviewing us on your favorite podcast host keeps us going.
Yeah. And if you have ideas or questions for us, head over to the website's comment section. We'll be happy to take them under advisement. That was lawyerly, wasn't it?
It was.
But if you've got a question for the Queen or for Jonathan or for us, leave us a voicemail or a text at 719-453-1514. Also, follow me on Twitter. I am @FatCyclist. I am also on Strava, where I am Fat Cyclist. My first name is Fat, and my last name is Cyclist. See what I'm doing. Why not? Can't hurt. You can also find me on Facebook, where I am just plain old Eldon Nelson. I'm also back to posting on fatcyclist.com, so of course you can find all of our episodes and other stuff there too.
Good luck, everyone, in your training. Check your feed for a new episode next week, and we'll see you at the finish line.